we're still waiting for two other speakers. They're on their way, but let's begin. Uh, please introduce myself. Let me introduce myself. Oh, Padino is here. Uh, thank you. No worries. Have a seat. All right, so let me introduce myself. My name is Zulfikar. I'm the director of the China-Indonesia desk at the Center of Economic and Law Studies. And I would like to thank all of you for making the time to be here today. We have from the Embassy of Cambodia, we have His Excellency Mr. Ambassador of Peru, from Denmark, from New Zealand, from the US, the UK, from the European External Action Service, and some of our colleagues from the media. Uh, as all of you know, on the April of 4th, we were celebrating the 75th anniversary of China-Indonesia relationship. And we thought China as an important partner for Indonesia, we need to see how the relationship has progressed for the past 75 years. And of course, there are so many interesting developments that have taken place in the cooperation, and there are so many problems that have persisted and that have emerged. That's why we titled this event Continuity and Change, because there are some continuities in the relationship that have started in 1950s, and of course there are many changes that have happened along the way. And to discuss this, we have several line of speakers today. We have Pak Bima Yudhistira, who is the Executive Director of SLIOS. And then we have Pak Dino Kusnadi from the Directorate of East Asian Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. And last but not least, we have Ibu Christine, who is the co-founder and director of Gentala Institute. And to begin, I would like to let Mas Bima to give his presentation and some few opening remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning everyone, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Especially thanks for High Excellency ambassadors from Peru. I think it's very pleasure to have you here. Not only as a participants, maybe later on you can share Peru experience regarding with the China relations in the South Americas. And then Pak Dino, thanks so much Pak Dino. I think Pak Dino is a regular speaker here in the Celios events. His remarks and also perspective analysis, I think is very important for our forum here. And Bu Christina from Gentala, thanks so much for coming. I just want to begin to see that why we having this kind of events. Very small number of participants, invited only because we don't put the specific locations on the publications. So it makes sure that the people that want to come is people that have interests, want to know more about the historic, economic, political, cultural relations between Indonesia and China, even further China with the ASEAN. And also right now we see that China also play a lot roles as a trilateral relations with the Middle East, which is something currently happening right now in the housing project, in the renewable energy projects, even further in the critical minerals. So I want to introduce first I'm represent the CELIOS. CELIOS is independent economic think tank, meaning that we didn't receive money from any government, foreign government or Indonesian government. So that's our histories come that we need like more kind of objective research publications, but also to convince industries, embassies, also coming from the research institution, from the universities to discuss open ideas. And today, I think it's a very, very special moment to commemorate Indonesia and China 75 years relations. And we want to say that Celios is very, very eager to promote more constructive debate about what we done so far with the China relations in regard of the economic policies, even infrastructure project, critical minerals. I want to touch that a little bit. But we also want to see that from the Indonesian side, actually what is the demand of the Indonesian governments, Indonesian business, Indonesian peoples, from the Chinese government, from the Chinese company, from the Chinese university also, and then what we can shape ahead of it, any kind of the program or project that have mutually benefit both Indonesia and China. And this is also important moments because we have trade wars going on. China also, the victims of the trade wars, seems like in the second periods of the Trumps, the victims, not only China, but also Indonesia as victims of the trade wars. So enemy of the enemy is my friends, and US thinks that friends of mine become enemy, everyone. So, so it's like a strange world we have right now, and I think how to see that we're not like US versus China happening in Indonesia. I think it's bigger than that. It is not always talking about the balancing of powers, but it's always talking about how to see that many of the countries actually our friends in terms of trade relations, in terms of the investment relations. And I think I just want to say that these ideas come from Dr. Zulfikar Ahmad. I think he should be a speaker, not mine, because I'm more in the macroeconomic backgrounds, finance, but Dr. Zulfikar Ahmad have a lot of experience writing a lot of research, even though he's have disabilities, and I think it's very, very credible that he wrote a lot of the paper and journal about China and Indonesia, and China, US, and Indonesia. I think I want to start just a little bit brief. I think only 5 slides of presentations. Yeah. So the title is what we achieved so far and what we need to improve. I think next one. I just want to say that in terms of the trade relations and investments, we think historically China, to be fair, has developed a strong relations with Indonesia. More than 25% of Indonesia exports goes to China. And then import also, majority of Indonesia import come from China. And we think that we play a significant role as a value chains. So any of the raw materials, half processed materials, for instance, in the nickels, bauxite, even coppers. We know that the US companies in coppers still interest so much, Freeport. But we think that many of the copper export also goes to China, and then they process again in China and export it to the rest of the world. So we think that China have a very, very important roles in terms of the trade relations, especially to expand more non-oil and gas. But we can see here the portions, even though this is a total amount of the export of the non-oil and gas, Indonesia to the rest of the world is increasing dramatically, but we see that China is not that much. So China is a very big populations, very big numbers of the peoples. Even though the economic little bit shaky, but we think that if we can push more export to China in terms of the non-oil and gas export, whatever it is, fishery, consumer goods, even pharmaceuticals, raw materials, technological export, even though we just lag behind the Vietnam, Malaysia for developing the semiconductors and also EV components. But we think that if we can more increasing export to the Chinese domestic market to consume in China, I think that is one thing that we need to achieve in the next couple of years. And then the situations of the trade wars means that Indonesia will close relations more to the BRICS, especially with the China. And when we think that China economy is very, very important for the Southeast Asians to develop further. Compared with the Indonesia export to the US, I think the number is like fluctuate a little bit, but seems like flat over the times, the gray line. And then from the investment perspective, I think this is like pro and cons. In the pro side, I want to say that with the Chinese help at the time, Chinese governments, Chinese bank, and also Chinese companies, they help Indonesia to pursue the downstreamings. Because the downstreaming has been a dream of every Indonesian president since Sukarno. Everyone thinks that we need to export value-added materials more. And then Jokowi realized that kind of the dreams to make sure that we don't export the concentrate of the nickel ores, even though many of the European colleagues angry at the time. And then Chinese come and say that, okay, if you want to push that one, we have that kind of the technologies. And then they come and invest. So we have to see that the shift of the investment in the nickels industries, both upstream and downstream in Indonesia. Previously, 2005, 2008, South Korea there. And then we have a huge part of the investment come from India in the nickel mining at the time. But beginning to 2013 and beyond, China, Japan, become like dominant players in the nickels manufacturing. And right now, more than 80% of the Indonesia nickel half processed product goes to China market. So we have ferronickels, nickel pig irons, and nickel made for the battery goes to China. The con side, I think, is that Indonesia too much dependence on the China market and China investments? And also, is Indonesia too dependent on the Chinese financings to the downstreamings of all the critical minerals, not only nickels, including the bauxite? So we think that Indonesia governments once said, how about the domestic bank of Indonesia, state-owned enterprise bank, why they don't interest so much on the downstreamings? Once, because it's a too risky business at the time. The second one, perhaps the company that already invests in the nickel critical minerals processing already dominated by the Chinese company. And they have all the liquidity come from the China mainland, from the Hong Kong, from all the international bank to finance the smelters project. So I want to talk about the cons later on, but in the beginning we will see that historically Indonesia and China strong relations in the trade and investments also help nations prospers in terms of the many regions began to develop their own GDP growth, I think, and then many of them live out from the poverty. But there is a lot of things to be discussed to make sure that all the trade and investments is a mutually balanced. So in Indonesia, we don't think that, okay, let's balancing the trade between Indonesia and China. I think that will be very ridiculous. Or the one that say that is like ultra-nationalist, right? It's like Trump rhetorics. We don't want to use that. We just want to show that, okay, we still need import from China, but we can export more. and we have that kind of the competitiveness to be developed, human skill to be developed. So talking about the human skills, I think people-to-people collaborations to see that there is a huge gap between China, Malaysia, in terms of the global talent competitiveness index versus Indonesia, the blue line. Even though Indonesia still somewhat better than India. So it says that the global talent competitiveness index, how the countries, how the governments, how the education systems retain the best talents, develop their skills, so that the competitiveness not only come from the commodities, extractive raw materials, but also come from the human skill, human resources. So I think later on maybe Bu Christina will be talking a lot about people-to-peoples and educations and so on. Not really, okay. Yeah, so I think we want to develop more. And then we kind of happy to see that many of our colleagues in Indonesia University, after they graduate, they think that perhaps getting postgraduate in China, in many top university in China, develop the research publications and engage with the university in China, maybe like a alternative. Previously it's been an alternative. Right now it's the main destinations compared with the study in US or in Europe. So we see that the number of the students also increased to study. Even many of the high school students here in Jakarta, they dream to study Mandarin and then send abroad by their parents to Beijing, Shanghai, and any kind of the city in China to learn about cultures and also develop their university bachelor there. And the other area, I think, we see that China is so interested on the critical minerals. We understand there is a huge demand of the stainless steels, not only the EV battery raw materials, but we think that China already improved progress in terms of preserving their own forests. So the tree cover loss in the red line is China one. It can be like, okay, there is fluctuations, but seems like a flat. So it means that Indonesia should learn more, not only from Brazil, because Brazil actually going down. I think that's in the Bolsonaro era, if I'm not mistaken. So they cut a lot of the trees, and then after that, it's become like a decline, but still, compared with the 2012, 2010, Brazil still struggle to maintain their forest cover. So we can have like a trilateral cooperations, for instance, in the Tropical Forever Facility Fund, or TFFF. So Brazil, ahead of the COP30, they want to initiate how to protect the forests while maintaining the economy. And I think China can help, because China also proved to maintain a good forest covers, to decrease number of the deforestations. And Indonesia, I think, similarly better, 2016, but in 2023, I think that's the number of the forest tree cover loss is increasing. So we have deforestations, and many of the area that having a deforestations located in the critical minerals minings and also critical mineral smelters. So I think China can have more support to Indonesia Ministry of Forestry, because previously the traditional support of the Ministry of Forestry has come from Norway with the RED Plus and so on, and right now follow Netsing. But we didn't see that China contribute much about the climate and also forest issue. This is kind of the cons. So first I want to say the pros of the Chinese investments in Indonesia, but there is also a lot of the costs to be burdened by the Indonesian community in terms of the downstreamings from the huge deforestation, since we banned the export of the nickel ores, and then the smelters demand more mining. And the concessions of the mining somehow in the many of the protected forests and also indigenous community forests. And then there is water pollutions, heavy metal contaminations, impact on the clean water sources. Even people in some area, they need to pay for the clean water sources. Previously, before the nickel booms, they just get it from the well, from the river, and right now they need to pay for clean waters, land degradations, marine pollutions, but also the air pollutions. So we estimate 3,800 premature deaths related to the air pollutions coming from the heavy reliance on the coal in the smelters of the nickels. And then also in the social dynamics, I think we need to learn a lot from what happens in Brazil. So in December 2024, I think just 4 months ago, the BYD factories in Bahia states in Brazil just closed because of the findings of the Brazilian authority. They found that more than 160 of the Chinese foreign workers work like wake up at the 4 a.m. with the unlivable conditions, with the harsh conditions, something like that. But the Brazilian authority proved that, okay, we need more foreign direct investments. You can build your automotive industries. You can sell your car here or you export it somewhere. But to make sure that you need to comply with the local and national regulations. And also there is issues of the transparency. I think the lesson learned from the Brazil is so much important for Indonesians and also for the Chinese company, because at the time I discussed with the Chinese embassy, and I asking the same questions over, because this is like already happening like 10 years, the destructions of the critical minerals and forests. And then I asked to the Chinese embassy that, why you're not improving your working conditions? Because if you want to play long, not only to play short, you need to take care of this kind of the workers, because every month there is news about the worker accidents, people getting hurt in the factories levels, safety standards, and the local community protesting the company, even blockade the street and so on. And the Chinese embassy at the time replied that, well, thousands of the Chinese company in Indonesia, and I think what they need to do is should comply with the local regulations. So I don't want to blame the Chinese company for all the mistakes, but I just want to say that it is also the Indonesian government's inactions, the local governments, that do not stop that kind of the harmful conditions for this kind of the practice in critical minerals. So as a result, I think the US find out that, I think back in 2024, that company in the US be aware that the sources of the nickels in Indonesia also violated kind of the labor standards. And there is kind of the problems with the foreign workers from China, that their contracts, their working conditions not meet any kind of previous contract or the one that already agreed by the Chinese worker back in the homeland. So I think we need to see that if the China want to play long in Indonesia, not only in the nickel but all over industries, I think maintaining how they can care more about the worker conditions, about the local economy, about the local government's involvement, the transparency of the process, I think it's very, very important. So we want to see that in the 76 years Indonesia-China relations, so next year there should be major improvement in terms of this kind of the practice of the downstreaming, at least in the downstreaming. The other one, we investigate about the cement industries also at the time also the same. And then the anti-monopoly agency broke this case about the cements products from China, investment in Indonesia, why they are so cheap, because they pressures many kind of the labor standards. not related to the local regulations. And then to make in the futures what we need to be done. So I think the problems once with the downstreamings of the nickels industries and in the steels and cement industries is the heavy reliance on the coal. So Celios always have this kind of the mandate to maintain the climate justice in every kind of our diplomacy. So the problem is why China, which is also have abundance and cheap renewable energies, whether winds or solar PV, I think they can help Indonesia to achieve that kind of the energy transition as well. Because we can see that the China investment in solar panel capacity has risen tenfold in 5 years. So it means that right now, to think that building the captive coal power plant is cheaper than the solar PV, than the wind energy or any renewable energy, even with the battery energy storage, I think that's not true. Coal should be more expensive, and Chinese company in Indonesia should think how they can transitions from the coal heavy reliance, from the fossil fuel heavy reliance to the more renewable energies. So I think this kind of the message. And the big question is, once again, is the Chinese fault to bring more coal project in Indonesia, demand more coal mines, or is it Indonesian governments that didn't ask more cooperations and collaborations to bring more renewable energy project to Indonesia from China? And then this is also the wind turbine price created by China, also well below global average. So I just want to say something about the Pakistan story. It's very interesting. So the accident happened in Pakistan, where the governments already built a lot of the coal power plants. And then there's a huge demand suddenly from the Pakistan to the solar PV. And the solar PV is imported from China. So the household in Pakistan right now happy to use more solar PV than on-grid electricity coming from the coal plants. And then I asked a colleague from the Pakistan, he said that, okay, after we import components and battery from the China, right now the Pakistani governments want to negotiate with the Chinese government to bring those components manufacturing from China to Pakistan. So there should be a technological transfers. And we think that renewable energy is one champion that China and Indonesia can bring along. Because cheaper the price of the component, and there is a domestic manufacturer invest by the Chinese company, I think it's also help Indonesia to achieve energy transitions, because Prabowo already said that 75 gigawatts by 2040, if I'm not mistaken, in the G20 meetings, we need to achieve that kind of the target. So China should be the answer, but also trilaterals with the Middle East, because Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Uni Emirat Arabs also interest to finance this kind of the renewable energy project. So this is the last one. I think we just want to remind again that the deals already already discussed with the PLN, State-owned enterprise at the time. So 2024 Belt Road Initiative Conference, 54 billions on the tables, but we didn't hear what kind of the progress after that kind of the MOU between the PLNs and then SOE from China, bank from China also. So we need to push rather than MOU. I think you already have that MOU. What is the realization of the investments? And then the oversupply right now we're facing of the low-grade nickels, while the US EV market is in limbo. Chinese constructions property also right now not in a good shape, because many of the nickels processed in Indonesia is going for the stainless steels products. And I think how to ensure that Chinese companies see that they need to create more green premium nickels. We always talk that either green premium nickel, low carbon nickels with the source of the renewable energy. So the price of the nickels will be better in the international market, and then diversifications of the market, not only heavy rely on China, but also to Africa. They demand also the stainless steels, they demand also the EV battery materials. And then the Indonesia joined BRICS. Also, it's very, very important moments. I think Prabowo do both, join the OECD and join the BRICS. But OECD still need time to process, to harmonize a lot of the regulations. But join the BRICS, I think it's very, very important platform to enhance South-South cooperations, especially on the critical mineral governance. And then the big questions always rely how to sift the Chinese companies' interest in the clean energy. So these BRICS can be platforms, not only rely on the JETP, which is dominated by the G7, but also China, India, also can help Indonesia collaborate in the clean energy investment. And then the local governments, we call this JETB. So if the G7 have a JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership, with the Japan and Germany as a co-lead of this JETP, we call it JETB. And this kind of the initiative already happening. So Just Energy Transition Brotherhood. What is the brotherhood? So China city, municipal cities that already experienced previously heavily rely on the coal, and they have a good transition plan. It works that way, either with the solar PV, with the wind turbines, and then the municipal government in Indonesia learn, study in China, study on that cities and thinks that, okay, if China can do this, why Indonesians, regional governments, subnational governments, municipal city cannot do kind of the transformations itself. So it means like the cooperations not only work in the high levels like central government talk with the central governments, but also can work in the local governments levels. So this kind of the initiative, if we can bring to many of the municipal city, and I think not only to learn, but that kind of the city in China can bring their cheap renewable technologies to install in many cities in Indonesia. So we want to see that there's a hope. So I think the continuity, yes, but also hope to change for a better relations between Indonesia and China. I think that's Mas Fikar.
Thank you, Pak Bima. I think the key point that we can take, I think one of the key points that we can take is that when it comes to our relationship with China, we cannot always blame the Chinese. We need to look at the mirror and look at ourselves. And this is also proof by a lot of academic journal which says that how China invests is in accordance to how the local government navigates the investment. So I think that's a key point, because a lot of people in Indonesia, especially, they always have this mindset that all of this that happening is always because of China, and China, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it depends on how we receive, China. Not just, uh, we are not the statue, we are active agent. In fact, not only that we are active agent, but we are also active inviters. We are the one who invite Chinese investment to come in. We're not unmovable recipients. We actively invite Chinese investment, and I agree with you that the key is it's not always, we cannot always blame China. We need to see ourselves and how we receive China. And thank you, Pak Bima. And next, I would like to invite Pak Dino. Pak Dino is from the Directorate of East Asian Affairs from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I've known him for some time. When I did my master's and PhD in the UK, he was at the Indonesian embassy in London, and I think after that he served a few years at the Indonesian embassy in Beijing before returning back to Indonesia. Without further ado, I would like to give time to Pak Dino.
Um, Thank you for the kind introduction, Bapak and Ibu. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just start this discussion with 75 years is, I think, one of the optimal relations officially that Indonesia can do with regards to its bilateral relations. We were acknowledged after the Roundtable Agreement at the end of December 26 or 27 of December. So it's hard for a certain country to recognize us during the Christmas season. So that's why most recognitions of Indonesia started out in 1950. So 75 years is indeed a long time in its relations. We've had our ups and downs. But usually if I speak with Indonesian students regarding Chinese-Indonesia relations, we forget that as a society, Indonesia and China has already been having relations for more than thousands of years. Nusantara has exported its spices to China. We've received their ceramics, their silks, and so forth. And our spices were one of the main products that were traded in the Silk Road. So I jokingly says that, oh, the silks was actually to hide the spices which were more expensive in their caravans. And if you look into all these trails, you can see the Indonesian cloves or nutmegs that were prized as something of expensiveness in the past and that were exchanged in the spice routes or in the Silk Roads. So from the Chinese side, they say that there's a maritime Silk Road, but parallel to that, from Indonesia to outside the world, including to China, we will call that the spice route, because our spices, which is uniquely from Maluku, was sought after in China as Chinese traditional medicine. So these relationships is making the foundations of the psyche of most Indonesians. And your brief comments about how we treat foreigners, not just Chinese, but also, I guess, foreigners that comes outside of our islands. We have, in my view, that we have an island mentality. Indonesia is secured by water, and we gladly welcome anyone that tries to define this natural barrier and come visit us. But if you cause trouble or you cause mischievous or something that we don't like, for sure that you will become the blame. So it's not racist, it's that anything foreign that causes havoc will get the blame, and that's just from the island mentality that we have. Back to the main topic. Let me just skip down to the latest. Well, this is basically the contents that I have, 75 years. We know that already. There are several activities that we're going to have, stamps, seminars, also business meetings. But let me just skip to the Comprehensive Security Dialogue, which is the latest agreements that we have with China that supersedes and is a continuation of our strategic and comprehensive partnership that we have with China in 2013. Now, for China, this relations is one of the highest grade that we have, received by China, of course, and likewise in Indonesia, the comprehensive and strategic partnership reflects our most highest priorities in maintaining relations, and because it has a very strong foundation, but also very strong outcomes and outputs that we have. So if you look into our relationships since 1990, where we reestablished our relations, and then in 2001 we had the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement signed, and it started to get entry into force in 2011 or 2012. This expedited not just Indonesia, but also the region in ASEAN. This free trade, if we look into our books in 2011, there was a lot of angst that Indonesia will be overcome or will be flooded with Chinese goods. But 10 years later, it turns out that from one time, and we succeeded in balancing out the trade relations. Sometimes we're above 1.5 billion, and another year we may be like 500 or 1 billion in deficit, but not like in the past where we were 15 or 10 billions. But now we've gradually balanced out our relations. Also, another point before we get into this comprehensive strategic dialogue is that among ASEAN countries, we are not the largest trading partner with China. We are ranked somewhere between third and fourth, number one being Vietnam, number two is Thailand, 3 and 4 is sometimes between Indonesia and Malaysia. So that will, later on, we'll see that there's still a lot of potential of cooperating together. But another point that I should make before going into the comprehensive strategic dialogue is that Indonesia has always strived historically and culturally to maintain a balanced, independent, and active foreign policy. We have been trying to be consistent in implementing this foreign policy of independent and balance, and that for us, whichever partner that can give us added value and can fulfill our national interest, which is implementing the Asta-Cita, that is I think, the main remedy that we are going through. So in this case, you can see that China, in the past 5 or 10 years, have been trying to fulfill the priorities of Indonesia. They've exchanged technologies, they've given that. They've trained us with skilled workers. We have been introduced into the high-speed train ecosystem that is way different than the one that we inherited from the Dutch. And that, I think, also contributed to a different mindset for Indonesians. Just a small factor from the Chinese experience with the high-speed railway. In 2009 was the first operational lines between Beijing and Tianjin, 250 kilometers. Now it's growing more than 35,000 kilometers of fast train. It's the largest in the world. The second largest, I think it's in Spain, which is less than 20,000. And their target is going into 75,000. Now, within that 10 years, that transformed the psyche of the Chinese people into becoming more disciplined, to book their tickets cheaper ahead, not spur of the moment. It's cleaner, it's faster. It has access to every city that is above 1 million population. So you can see how the movements of these people between rural and city is so dynamic, so that the population has, I think, become more and more sophisticated or civilized. I don't want to use civilized, but become much more teratur, tertib. That's the Indonesian word. And hopefully that having a new systems with the ecosystem of the fast train can also be inherited to Indonesia. And so it's not just about the economics, but it's how it will affect the people, the technology. We've seen how it can be done. And now we can move on to different areas in certain disciplines. But last month, we had the 2+2 dialogue, which is also a new mechanisms that we have with China. So it's not just a foreign minister, but also involves the defense ministers dialogue. In the sidelines, the MOU for the comprehensive strategic dialogue was, I think, adjusted, because the old mechanisms is already different in terms of the participants and also the ministerial structure that we have. The comprehensive dialogue is mandated to the foreign ministers now, to the foreign ministry, and that it will supersede the HDCM, is the high-level dialogue, high high-level dialogue in cooperation mechanisms, which also has a joint committee on bilateral cooperations, that is JCBC. So the CSD will supersede, but has a similar structure, and that later on we will have a joint commission together, and that the draft MOU has initially initiated by Indonesia and accepted by the Chinese and signed in April 21st, 2025. Now, it's not just about mechanisms, but also it widens the base of cooperations that we had that is based on 5 pillars. So if we look into the next slide, there's 5 pillars here: political, security, economy, maritime, and people-to-people exchanges. Now, in the past 10 years, we've had so many, I think, collaborations that involve ministries and so forth that now it's possible for one ministry in China to directly contact the ministries in Indonesia, and based on this MOU, they can do their collaborations. And to oversee all these intertwining of collaborations, of course, that's why it's the need that we have a comprehensive strategic dialogue to oversee is whether, one, are we moving in the right directions? And also internally for Indonesia, is it fulfilling Indonesia's interest in fulfilling our priorities, including the Astacita? A lot has been done. I think it may take a lot more time. I would just appreciate if anyone wanted to pick a certain topics. I'll be more than happy to give a comment. But political, let me say that this is one of the bases that if we deal with the China, people-to-people relations, especially among the leaders, is very important. I think Indonesia, or even ASEAN, has benefited a lot with the leadership of President Xi Jinping. He understands the region's needs for stability, and that I think there's certain China is not as aggressive to ASEAN, especially that if we have a dispute within the South China Sea. We see that there's still a goodwill from China to try to find a solution, and that even that we have differences, there's a saying that China is that it's agree to disagree in political or in the territorial disputes. It should not hamper the good collaborations in economic and investments, and that later on that if we are ready to discuss, then we will discuss. So the political I think is very close, that each ministry has their own contact persons, which is very rare, I think, for Indonesia, because usually it goes through the foreign ministry, and now each ministry has their, I think, capability to implement that directly with the Chinese counterparts. Security is also, I think, why the 2+2 is interesting, is because, again, if we look into the independent and active foreign policy, that is, I think, one of the yardsticks that we have to balance out our middle spectrum. Perhaps some analysts have been saying to Indonesia that in the past 20 years we've been leaning too heavily on one side, and now by having this bilateral consultation forum with China is actually to just go back to the middle part for Indonesia. Some even says that, well, by having the security dialogues that we're now leaning towards China, and I would argue that we've never been leaning on China, is because in the past we've been leaning the other way. And now that we're trying to, I think, wisely go back into the middle. Economy, we've already talked that Indonesia in 2024 has a total trade of 135 billion US dollars. We're not the largest in ASEAN. The largest is Vietnam, around the numbers of 250 billion, if I'm not mistaken. The second would be Thailand with 180. I think that was during my years in Beijing, so I may be rusted in finding it out. But we've been consistent between 135, 148, and give or take a few. We've lost the market on coal after COVID, because now China is buying coal again from Australia. And so our less grade coal is not contributing towards this, but we're adding a lot more of palm oil that were once, I think, dominated by Malaysia. Now China is also buying palm oil from us, and of course processed nickel and perhaps processed minerals. In inbound investments, this tend to be a little bit misleading because I'm sure that China, together with Hong Kong, is the largest partner. But if you look on the administrative side of how these data are generated, Singapore continues to be the number one. But because it affects my kinerja from Beijing, I sometimes question the Chinese companies who held the regional office in Singapore. And I think one of the difficulties is that in China, if there's an investment from a Chinese company, it's easier for that Chinese company to have a regional office either in Hong Kong or in Singapore for reasons of administrative purposes. So if we look into closer with individual companies, I'm sure that China is, I think, one of the strongest investors in Indonesia in the past 5 or 10 years now. Maritime. Maritime is a continuation from the past two governments' tenure, and that we continually try to improve because there is a similar interest that China is trying to Indonesia support. So our interest is that as long as it doesn't interfere into the regulations and the integrity, territorial integrity of Indonesia, we're more than happy to collaborate. And so this is why that we have collaborations for technical cooperations for sustainable fisheries is mostly in the eastern part of Indonesia. And that was done very, I think, gradually. It's still being continued now to try to have new initiatives on these collaborations. And the last one out of the many collaborations that we have on maritime is the maritime safety cooperations between the Ministry of Transportations and the PRC safety administrations. And this is just due of different standards, different SOPs that we have between ships and ports, and that this needs to have a much more similar collaborations. The last one is people-to-people exchanges, and of course we have the Golden Visa programs. We're also trying to promote our Dharma Siswa scholarship program, hopefully that we can attract more Chinese-speaking Indonesians, which I think is a great investments for Indonesia. And that one point that we've pointed out is that the Chinese literature has a lot of references towards Indonesia. If we have Chinese scholars speaking Indonesians, we may have assistance in trying to find written documentations about Indonesia in China, to which we don't have, and just fill in the gaps of our historical backgrounds with China. And also, again, we are more than happy to build up again the momentum that we have before COVID. Before COVID, if I can remember that we have more than 14 to 15,000 Indonesian students. Not much. There's a lot more in Europe or in the United States or in Australia, but it should be growing. Now we haven't reached again that same number of 15,000, and I think that's an interest that Indonesia would like to go beyond the pre-COVID numbers. The way forward, how can we do? What should we do then? Okay. I think this is also important, yeah. I think we should start first with independent and active foreign policy to balance out the spectrum so that we can stand in the middle, not favoring one or the other. And that way is that we can have a much more, not neutral, but a much more balanced process of having friends with everyone so that we can fulfill both our interests and move together. The comprehensive strategic dialogue is, I think, one avenue that can be followed by the public sector, but also with careful management, because we've seen that ideally we would want this concept to be taken, but implemented on the ground is also different. Hello. Okay, again, from the Indonesian's perspective or perception is that we are trying to develop our infrastructure, we're trying to do downstreaming, we're trying to gain relevant technology for us to bring it further and try to improve the workforce in Indonesia. I'm reminded that one of the goals of President Prabowo is to achieve the golden years of Indonesia in 2045. Now, 2045 is within 20 years. Now, within that 20 years, what are the foundations that we can use to fulfill that goal of the Indonesian golden years in 2045? Now, China also sees that, and we've been trying to communicate with them. Can you help us within 20 years reach these goals? And I think the signals from China is that we've been there, we've done that, and we gladly to share, because again, the concept that China is telling us is a community for a shared future. Now, as I think from an Asian or from an Indonesian standpoint, if you bring the word community, it means that no one gets left behind. Everyone has a role, and that the poor is assisted by the rich, and the unfortunate will be assisted by the fortunate. And the stronger the community, each person there will also make each and every individual prosperous and benefit. That's how I see the word community is, and we've seen that in practice. Kebiasaan kampung, and also it's relevant within our Pancasila, our 5 principles. So within that concept, we see that China is a strong supporter of Indonesia's interests, based on a win-win. Again, the word win-win is, I think, the opposite of competition. If you are in a competition with a country, if you're competing, then you have a winner and loser. The loser loses everything. They reset and start from scratch again. But I don't think that is Indonesians' mindset, is that we do not accept any losers, because it's the lives of the people. We don't leave behind people who are unfortunate. We have to take care of them. So within a more social spectrum is that a win-win is much more better off. It may take a slower pace than the competitive way, but that's the chosen way that we have, and that the added value that collaborating with China gives us, and that is why China is a very strong, I think, relations with Indonesia. So the key word is added value with China. We make sure that it has added value within the interest or priorities of Indonesia. And number 2 is that it can uplift Indonesia's priorities and fast track that into achieving the Indonesian golden years in 2045. Um, Again, this is just maintaining a balanced spectrum, bebas and active, or independent and active, continuing the comprehensive strategic partnership of 2013, and mutually beneficial for China and Indonesia in advancing national interest. Let me close by a certain, I think, note that some people may forget. When we signed the comprehensive strategic partnership, it was President Xi during his first or second year visiting Indonesia in a state visit. That was in 2013. In that visit, he gave a speech in front of the Indonesian parliament, and that was, I think, a rare occasion for visiting leaders, or maybe the first time, yeah. I'm sorry I didn't have that knowledge yet. But it was in that speech that he, for the first time, launched his initiatives of the Maritime Silk Road, which by definition would open the door for Southeast Asia to collaborate within the GDI, the Global Development. Oh, so the Belt and Road, BRI, sorry. The Belt and Road initiatives, which was initially focused on the continental part of China. And putting the remedy of the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement with China in 2011, plus the Belt and Road initiatives to Southeast Asia, that propelled ASEAN to become the #1 trading partner with China in 2021, surpassing the European Union. And if my calculations is incorrect, I think we've surpassed the 1 trillion trademark of ASEAN with China. Where do we stand? I think managing part is that we talk together with ASEAN countries and say, what's your experience with China? How do we move forward? So that's another close engagement that we have within ASEAN. But I think Indonesia is confident, and we have a very high trust level with China, historically and also contemporarily, that we are in a very good relations. And of course, within an independent and active foreign policy, we do not close our doors with other countries. But I guess our word is, if you can give us a better deal than China, then why not? So our word is, if within the competition that you would like, why not compete fairly with China and see whether that it can bring benefit, win-win situations for both our countries. So within that context, let me end this, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Patino, for providing a very comprehensive overview of the relationship between Indonesia and China. I think it demonstrates all the aspects and all the pillars of the cooperation. And just to add that now the relationship has even expanded into new sectors, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, or Indonesia has been a very important destination for this so-called China digital Silk Road, which I think has been happening since the enactment of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2014. I think you're right that the relationship has expanded significantly, covering different sectors, and I just remembered one more sector is space. We are going to space with China, with the help of China as well. And recently Xinhua published a news item on the space cooperation between China and Indonesia as well. And the next speaker is Dr. Christine, who is the co-founder of Kendala Institute, a very important institute linking Chinese and Indonesian businesses. If I'm not mistaken, Bu Christian did his PhD in Peking University. And without any further ado, I will give you time and microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Fikar, and also thank you for the organizer for having me. I've been waiting for the invitation for quite some time, you know. No, just so thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here. Telios has done a lot of good work, great work, I think, in doing research on Indonesia-China. Although we don't necessarily share, we do have a lot of differences in opinions and views, but I very much welcome the invitations, and I'm very glad to be here. And also I see a lot of friends and who are here as well. So I'm hoping that I can keep my presentation brief and also sort of like pick your brains later during the Q&A sessions. So my presentation, I don't have a PPT, I'm sorry. um, so my presentation will be I will start with providing certain historical context that I think is relevant for the 75 years. And then I'm going to mention the 4 M's that basically become the highlights of the bilateral relations that has gained momentum during this period of geopolitical tensions. And I think if there is still time, I'm going to comment a little bit about the current situation with the tariff um, and and then I'm going to throw it back to the moderator for the Q&A sessions. Um, the historical context that I want to mention is that Indonesia-China relations, we do have 75 years of it, but we suffer 20 years of diplomatic freezing, in a sense that during which travel was completely banned, materials from China was completely banned. Only during the late 80s that the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce managed to convince President Suharto to quietly visit Canton Fair and engage in trade affairs with China, and that was in late 80s. So aside to the 20 years of diplomatic freezing, there's also the 30 years of New Order regime during which assimilation policy was implemented quite severely. In this assimilation policy, there are 3 pillars of Chinese identity that has been severed by the government that have serious ramifications to the bilateral relations that is still felt up until now. The 3 pillars including Chinese schools, Chinese media, and also Chinese associations, during which all kinds of cultural expressions and China-related activities, be that materials, content, were restrictively banned. My mother almost went to jail because she tried to call her friends to teach us at home learning Chinese. Some schools during my elementary schools were forced to set up a quiz day that which scores will affect our graduation, etc., in order to make sure that the Chinese students will not celebrate Chinese New Year and attend school. Now we have it as a national holiday. So with this context, the ramification of it is not just about the fundamentally shaping the mindset of how Indonesian sees China. Not just China in terms of China the country, but also Chinese citizen in mainland China and also Chinese Indonesians like myself, as well as the problems of quote-unquote communism, socialism, and Marxism. So this kind of like sweeping obstacles for engagement has been crucial in diminishing Indonesia's ability to engage China optimally up until now. If you see generations of young Chinese in Indonesia, a lot of them don't even speak Chinese. A lot of them are effectively disconnected from engagement with China. I think Mas Bima, Yeta di belakang. Mas Bima mentioned earlier about people to people. Only just recently that we've seen increased numbers of students going to China to study, including the Chinese Indonesian. But I guess that's the context, is the historical context that I always want to emphasize. So the 4 M's that I want to highlight in this discussion, first M is modernization. The second M is multipolarity. The third M is monetary and fiscal. And the fourth is media. So if you want to talk about modernization, it's more related to the kind of engagement that allows technological transfer and human development. And this can be the kind of modernization that we've seen. Physically, we can see from the infrastructure development as the Belt and Road progress all over the world, including in Indonesia. We see significant infrastructure development coming from the BRI investment, irregardless of the fact that the Indonesian government seems to be reluctant to label some of those infrastructure projects as Belt and Road. Which is odd, but then again, that's beside the point. And also the kind of modernization that I think quite crucial during this, after the 75 years is the green transitions and the digital and AI transition, especially when it comes to the green energy involvement in Indonesia, green energy investment from China in Indonesia. If you look at the throughout the 75 years of relations with China, I think the comprehensive strategic partnership era that was started in 2013 was probably, marked the giant leap in these relations. You see trade values triple from 2013 until the present. You see export value, Indonesian export value nearly double to China. And in Chinese investment in Indonesia, 27 times compared to 2013 up until now. And these numbers exclude Hong Kong and also exclude Singapore. As we can always joke around in the sense that a lot of the investment from Singapore actually came from China as well. But then again, I don't really have the numbers, but this is like a common secret for everyone. And Hong Kong's investment, the number is nearly similar to the Chinese investment number. So this is kind of like, in statistical wise, you can see how the improvement in the bilateral relations can be physically felt. But also at the same time, when it comes to modernization, it seems that a lot of the investment coming from China are more sporadic in a sense that as Mas Fikar mentioned earlier, a lot of the issues actually came from our own governance, our own domestic ability to set up a blueprint in terms of how we're going to pursue our development. I think some great indication was shown when President Jokowi introduced the Global Maritime Fulcrum, highlighting the characteristic of Indonesia as a maritime power, etc. But if you look at some of the majority of the investment coming from China, a lot of it are actually not synchronized with the supposed synergy between Global Maritime Fulcrum and Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of the investment actually focuses more inland, focuses more on the minerals and also the downstreaming sectors, which pretty much become not that effective when it comes to strengthening Indonesia's ambition to become a maritime power. But then again, as I said, in this modernization period, the kind of like engagement that we have at the moment will eventually focus on the green transition and the digital and AI transition, because this is pretty much being impacted more from the China's domestic transition itself, because China has been able to accelerate the green transition and also the AI and digital transition rapidly. So Indonesia, I think, is more sort of like joining the wagon and also sort of like tapping into that kind of progress instead of having our own blueprint in terms of which areas we want to sort of like boost, as well as the discipline to allocate the investment coming from China to that more sort of like optimal sectors. And I think in terms of the modernization aspect, I also want to mention something related to the good governance, the relevance between good governance and high technology, which is the anti-corruption activities. If we see in Indonesia, in the past past decades, we've seen, this is irregardless of the Chinese investment, but we've seen like how the use of technology, high-tech digital have helped reduce the high-cost economy, including in doing business or even doing our own personal administrative necessities, like making ID card, like, when you have traffic violation, you can sort of like use digital payment, etc., instead of this, processing under the table with envelope and money and cash. So in that sense, Indonesia has been quite responsive to that development. But I think the one thing that has been part of the criticism for the Chinese investment, regardless of that large influx of high-tech investment that includes technological transfer and human development, is the fact that the anti-corruption move has not been effectively integrated into the investment abroad, including in Indonesia. At some point, the BRI established this open, green, and clean. Our former Vice President Yusuf Kala was there to sign the MOU and also sort of like to support. But I think that there is little confidence amongst the population and even also the government officials about how this is going to be affected. And there are a lot of questions in terms of, so when Chinese corporations are making mistakes in their investment, including ranging from environmental degradation and towards or to corruptions, etc. Is there any information? Is there any steps taken by the Chinese government to impose the anti-corruption sanctions towards these practitioners? This is in contrast to the actual anti-corruption movement in China domestically, where they managed to slap the tigers and the flies. They arrested and investigated thousands of Chinese party officials and government officials, but nothing similar has been heard on the side of their investment abroad. Although, as far as I understood, the Chinese government has already established the institution to do this kind of monitoring. So we're going to see, we don't know whether this is lack of implementation or lack of effective communication when it comes to sort of like spreading the information, which will have implications towards not just the partnering countries not knowing that such good effort has been done, but also it reduces the impact towards the potential violators, because they thought, oh, okay, nothing's going to happen to me, and they never heard about the punishment that others have been sort of like suffering. So I'm going to go into the second M, which is the multipolarity / multilateralism. I think this is more related to the international order. I think the most prominent one is Indonesia's decision to join BRICS Plus, and there's a lot of sort of like attention being put there. And I also don't understand. I see the tendency for I see some sort of like majority of the perceptions in looking at China as the only dominant power in BRICS. Whenever the discussion about BRICS is being mentioned, whereas within BRICS you have Russia, you have India and Brazil, who are actually quite dominant players and a significant contributor to the actual organization itself. And my concern is that this is going to repeat the mistake of RCEP during the time like when during the earlier period of RCEP introduction. A lot of the scholars or the media mentioning like RCEP as a China initiative. I remember Ibu Mari Pangestu was so annoyed about it because it was actually Indonesia who initiated the idea, Pak. So the BRICS issue might be suffering the same problems. So there's a possibility that this is the sort of like the narrow-mindedness of certain parties in looking at every issue from the lens of U.S.-China competition almost obsessively, and to the extent that it might be useless, and also it might be reducing the agency of relevant entities within the dynamics that is often undermined by this kind of like perceptions. And of course, like the importance of this M is that now with the new Trump presidency in power, and it's the history of Trump 1.0 of ignoring multilateral engagement, undermining regionalism as well. We sort of like already suspected that similar approach will be adopted. Looking at how the Trump administration announcing the tariff and how the tariff itself are being announced and how they are sort of like making list of, okay, who's on the first one who wants to negotiate with America. Oh, like these countries came to me begging, etc., etc. So this is another indication of how this particular M is going to be ignored further. And I think there are a lot of views that saying that, oh, this is going to be to the benefit of China. And I don't think that situation is that simple. There are a lot of layers, as I said, this almost obsessive obsessive point of view in looking at everything through the US-China always, is sort of like, has proven to be almost like detrimental to sort of like encouraging countries outside that superpower, the two superpowers, to be more assertive or at least gain more attention when it comes to voicing out their concerns. And also,
5 more minutes.
okay. And I think there's, I just want to mention one more about the ASEAN, the second M is about the ASEAN. I think ASEAN has been considered as like less effective, etc. But I would argue that with the participation of Indonesia and also showing interest of Malaysia and Thailand in BRICS, there should be some like more synergy between ASEAN based mechanism within the BRICS mechanism as well. You have ASEAN coordinators, country coordinators engaging bilateral engagement. You also have like sort of like different continents. This is maybe be considered to have like whether it's ASEAN Secretariat or which particular country that will be the coordinator for in this platform BRICS, because this is important, because this will allow a dialogue platform that is cross continents. You have the African continent representative there, you have the Latin American representative there, and also the Middle East representative there. And this is going to be, it depends on how our government is going to effectively use this platform. The third M is monetary and fiscal. I'm not going to dwell this too long, but this is going to be important because I think the issues of de-dollarization and also the BRICS currency, etc., has overshadowed the reality that the region itself, under the framework of ASEAN Plus 3, has been the past decade pushing for reduced dependence with dollars, and also pushing for increased use of local currencies. Not just about RMB internationalization, but also the attempt for the local government to, the ASEAN member states to improve the use of local currencies and also to avoid the risk of geopolitics, especially being heightened, like what happened during the Ukraine war, when the tariff, the sanctions, the economic sanctions that are being imposed against Russia are triggering a warning signs for a lot of countries in the regions about how much the over-dependence with dollar would affect the country. The fourth is the media. I think when I speak of media, it includes the traditional media, social media, and also the communication platform, including WhatsApp, which is very popular in Indonesia, and WeChat, which is very popular in China. The thing is, like, as I mentioned earlier about the historical context, there's this asymmetrical distribution of information, and there is the asymmetrical power the asymmetrical distribution of information has affected the spread of information. If you look at the mainstream media, for example, Indonesian mainstream media relied heavily on sources like AP, Reuters, and less so from agencies like Xinhua agencies, or which is technically sort of like representation, quote unquote, of China. So because of the history, because of the current situation, the fact that the over reliance on the sort of like Western media, Western mainstream media, I think there is, despite the increased attempt by Chinese media to increase their presence in the region, I haven't seen a more effective sort of like implementation of this increased presence. That's why I think I'm actually quite surprised to see, I'm curious to see like why Celios is having a workshop to train journalists against Chinese propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. First, considering the sort of like the gap, knowledge gap, and also the gap of access from media in China, I would have thought that we need more information from China rather than anything else. And according to journalism ethic, you should sort of like, you should be wary of propaganda, period. Not just propaganda from China. You got a lot of propaganda from other countries as well, from United States, like Voice of America, or like from other countries as well. So in terms of journalism ethic, you should sort of like consider like, be wary of propaganda, period, instead of taking sides. And because I think that's the fundamentals of the fourth pillar, right? Media, how media independence can be sort of like relied upon to provide an alternative, critical views of what's been happening in certain countries. One short point before I give back to Fikar about the tariff. I think it's ironic that the current Trump administration is repeating Indonesia's mistakes when it comes to engaging with China. Ironic because Indonesia has been learning a lot from United States, from our own democratization process, and also about our knowledge about China. But then again, Trump is now repeating the mistakes of Indonesia. For example, one, over-excessive with political or ideological agenda that is overshadowing a realistic understanding of the new China now. And I think this is one of the fundamental mistake in the tariff war that Trump is imposing now is the lack of understanding from the Trump administration of the new China. And this is also because of the second mistake, which is the disconnect that was created during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, through the China Initiative program, in which like people-to-people relations was disconnected. Visa applications was made difficult. People were arrested. People are accused of espionage, etc. And during this period, which is not being changed during the Biden period, create a disconnect and lack of engagement, which later on, led to this misunderstanding about China and also the tendency to underestimate what China is all about now. So I'm hoping that Indonesia will not follow that footstep because we have enough problems and we have done that kind of similar mistake in the past. Hopefully we're not going to repeat the same mistake in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Christine, for the comprehensive presentation. And because we have limited time, I would like to open the session for question and answers. I think I will begin with 3 questions. Anyone wanted to give a remark? I think I will start with Mr. Ambassador for the question. Microphone. Maybe you can mention your name and your embassy or institution.
Thank you. My name is Luis Tsuoyama. I am the ambassador of Peru. Thank you for the invitation. It was very interesting presentation from each one of you. But the last one, just as a comment about what do you mean with new China? What is the meaning of the new China? Is the China of Xi Jinping? Is the China that has changed in the last 10 years? Or, last 10 years maybe? What is the meaning of that?
Thank you. Next. Yes. From the back.
Thank you. My name is Teguh from Global Nostra think tank. I would like to give the question to Pak Bimo regarding your presentation about protecting forests as the potential thing for China and Indonesia for collaborating. Is it related with the carbon credit? And then, what's your perspective of in the future? This multipolarism, you know, happening now, the effect on carbon credit between Indonesia and China, if we related that into, let's say, the competitiveness between G7 and BRICS. Thank you.
Any, any more question? I think, yes, from Sinhua.
Okay, thank you. My question is for Mr. Tino, but we know that Indonesia has the idea of 1,000 friends, 0 enemies, and and in the coming months we'll have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. First question is, will Indonesia attend or has Indonesia received invitation for to attending the meeting first, and how does Indonesian government see the opportunity with the expansion of the membership, because last year they included also India, Pakistan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think the first question is for Kristen.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for that fantastic question. Interesting that the description of New China, I think, varies from period to period and also from perspective, different agencies, different point of view. But when I mention New China, I think it's more relevant towards how the US-China engagement has evolved, especially after the pivot to Asia. So the new China that I see at the moment, one is a more self-reliant China, because I think the background of this is, this. As far as I understood, China has been becoming increasingly wary of the US when the pivot to Asia was introduced by the Obama administration. Even though it was not explicitly expressed, but China has noticed that its position in the eyes of the honeymoon period is done, almost over. That's why it also, the one thing that I noticed is that then that was also when the period of time 2012, when it was during the Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao period, that they start mentioning about China's neighboring countries' diplomacy. In the past, China diplomacy always focused on this several concentric, the first of which is always great power relations, especially with US, and in this case with Russia as well. But in 2012, there's a sort of like implicit message, a subtle message during the speech by Premier Wen Jiabao about attempting to increase attention toward the neighboring countries. That was 2012. And at the moment, just a couple of weeks ago, President Xi Jinping convened several meetings, both in the government agencies and also within the party system, of about this working group, study group about neighboring countries' policies. So this new China has already established a self-reliant position, not just in terms of the tariff, in which there's a reduced number of import from United States that comes to China. So whatever tariff that that the US imposed toward China, it's not going to severe. Let's just say that China feels confident that the tariff will I think, how do I say this? Will probably affect United States harder first, rather than affecting China. And this self-reliant is also followed by the new China that is more regionally aware. Regionally aware, some would say expansion when it comes to engagement with countries in the region. Some would say assertiveness or like dominance, etc. But I think this is also something of the realizations from the Chinese perspective of the deepening of regional economic integration. I think if one thing that I have to admire about China is that China is very adaptive when it comes to engagement with the region. And when it comes to participations in the region, economically, the supply chains, including ranging from the initial, even before the Belt and Road and after the Belt and Road Initiative, the overall agenda is to help establish regional connectivity through infrastructures, which, to be fair, was desperately needed in Asia. At that time, investment coming from Europe or from United States no longer are interested in infrastructure development. So Asia at the time was suffering this kind of like need. So when China came in, I think it's sort of like, create an ecosystem where regional economic integration is deepened, and China shift the attention towards Southeast Asia, for example, with becoming the largest trading partner, increasing investment, etc. So this sort of like go hands in hand with the kind of self-reliant that China is. And the new China is also the one that is very more assertive when it comes to asserting a new type of global governance, if not regional governance, with the BRICS, with the establishment of ASEAN, sorry, like the upgrade of China-ASEAN free trade area, for example, and also domestically how China has geared itself to accept more engagement with the region. In 2018, for example, President Xi Jinping explicitly appointed Shanghai to be the hub for the China International Import Expo. And this is like import only. So it was an explicit message from China that we're opening our market, please come. And for countries like Indonesia, it's very important because we want to increase our exports to China. But of course, capacity is another thing. But this is the new China that I'm talking about. When it context to, that's why like this type of new China will not only sort of like face the US tariff problem, but also going to engage with the regional problem, quote unquote. So this is overall the new China. But I'm quite curious what Mr. Ambassador what you think about the new China. So please enlighten us later. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Next question is for Ms. Bima.
Yeah, related to the forest carbon, I think the China Carbon Emission Trade Exchange, which is established in 2021, just focusing more on the energy sector first, rather than the forest. So I think related to the Indonesia, almost similar, Indonesia voluntary carbon market right now focusing on the electricity or power sector first. Even they don't include the steel sectors, which is contribute to more than 11% of the total carbon emissions globally. Yeah? So I think if we're talking about the collaborations between China, Indonesia, in terms of the forest collaborations, forest conservations, there is a lot of the things to do. For instance, the first one is nature-based solutions. So I think any kind of the actions that China can help direct funding to the indigenous community, to the local communities, to the social forestry, I think that's also helps to maintain the forest. Or even how the Chinese governments, like you mentioned, Christine, about the anti-corruptions. I think it's also related. So if there is corruption scandals in mainland China, the Chinese governments have a very, very harsh reactions. But in the overseas, they don't monitor closely about that kind of the practices. Similar with the forest destructions, deforestations happens because of the rush to get the critical minerals. So if the Chinese governments, Belt Road initiatives, new development banks under the BRICS, for instance, they have a kind of the safeguard to maintain responsibility of any of the Chinese company, Chinese money flew to Indonesia that have implications of the deforestations, I think they can get sanctions. Even though we understand that it's happening in Indonesia, they must follow Indonesian regulations. So that's one. The second things that I mentioned earlier is about the tropical forever facility. So This is cooperations beyond carbon. This is more advanced and satellite monitors. It means that if you have the increasing forest covers, you get more money. But if the forest cover or tree cover is lost, then you get sanctions, you get penalties. So China can have trilaterals with Indonesia. So there is a China and Sovereign Wealth Fund of the Middle East, any of the sovereign wealth funds. So they pitch the money there, and that's the returns of the safety assets, let's say only 3% per annum per year. So that kind of the 3% of the returns can contribute to the preserving the forest in Indonesia, in Kalimantan, in Papua, in wherever it is. So I think the Indonesians and China right now seems passive in this tropical forever fund facilities. Because if we want to achieve the carbons tradings or carbon mechanisms, I think the problem is not only because this is more a G7 agenda, because of the European Union already have an advanced carbon market, not because of that, but because the problem is how to make sure that the Chinese company that buy Indonesia carbons unit or carbon asset can be calculated and transferred to the Chinese. So the problem is the cross-border carbon market mechanism is not yet developed well. And then we need to check again, is Chinese carbon market in mainland China considered as a commodity, the carbon as a commodity or as asset? Because it's a totally different calculations. And also different translation into Chinese stock exchange or carbon market exchange kind of calculations. So I think another things we can do apart from the carbon trading between Indonesia and China. So that's my take. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is for Pak Dino, I think about SCO.
SCO, yeah, Shanghai Cooperation Organizations. During my time in Beijing, we were unofficially approached and trying to see of Indonesia's interest in joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations. Hence, in many activities that China as the host, we would get invitee status, not necessarily a member, but invitee status. I understand that this is handled by the Director General for Multilateral Affairs, and that there's always a calculation on how we join certain organizations, what can we contribute, and what benefits can we have, and that this is carefully calculated by them. But I don't see in the next foreseeable time that Indonesia may join. Because there's steps that we have to adhere to, and that there's many other topics on benefits and so forth, and of course relevancy. But I do know that the Indonesia's interest is along together with ASEAN interests, and that is why I guess from the SCO standpoint is that they would invite ASEAN as an organizations to partake in their activities, in their summits and so forth, as an invitee, but not as an observer or as a membership status. Historically speaking, that if you look into the development of this, it's much more regional, continental, rather than to the maritime of Southeast Asia. So in this part, I guess, within the context of bilateral, we are already good. China has already good relations with the region in ASEAN, and that the SAO, and if there are an interest, that we are gladly to be participating as a guest rather than as a full member.
Thank you. Pak Dino, I would like to open for one more session. 3 more questions, anyone? Yes. Sure. Please, Pak.
Hello, my name is Alex from Chinese Indonesian Association. I would like to ask about Taiwan, Indonesian and China Indonesian relation. right now is we know China and Taiwan tension about as you know the military show force there, but also in the same time Indonesia uh, Indonesian migrant also a lot of there in Taiwan, and also the 60% of chips produced in Taiwan.
Mm.
How the all speakers respond about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Second question, Bhukrishnan. You want to ask a question, right? All right. Any more questions from the audiences? Yes.
Aziz from another Sinhos team. Bu Christie has mentioned earlier that we have seen a significant improvement in terms of physical cooperation with China. For example, in trade, we have seen nearly double our trade value with China. And Mas Bima also mentioned earlier that we could balancing our trade deficit with China with different approach from what Trump's done with China through tariff, but we can improve or balancing our trade deficit through exporting more, especially non-oil and gas to China. And Dino also have mentioned that China is our strong supporter for Indonesia's interests. So my question is, from your point of view, in which sector that our relation hasn't yet strong enough with China, and we need to improve in the next 20 years, especially to achieve our golden age in 2045 as our president's goal. So in which sector that we have to strengthen our relation with China, and there is a potential there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. One more question? Any more question? If there is no more question, I would like to ask a question. I think as a moderator, I have the privilege. I think we have spoken a lot about the progresses that we have made over the past several years, but we haven't spoken about some elephants in the room. One of which is the South China Sea. Although Indonesia is not a claimant state, but over the years we have seen cases of Chinese vessels entering our EEZ, and how and I think how Indonesia should respond to that particular issue, and especially after the signing of joint statement between Prabowo and Xi Jinping in November, which I myself see it as a change in his position from his previous tenure as a defense minister. And then now with the president, he was very strong in terms of the South China Sea, and then there was a sudden of change with the joint statement. How do we see that, and how Indonesia should act on that particular issue? And I think related to the question about Taiwan, my second question is about, we talk a lot about Indonesia's independent foreign policy, and I think one particular issue that worth mentioning is the issue of Xinjiang. Indonesia has been very vocal in terms of our support for the Palestinians, but not really about the Muslims in Xinjiang. In fact, in October 2022, we voted no when it comes to the UN about to debate about the issue. We decided to vote no, and I think my question is like, how do we maintain our independence when it comes to certain issues, pertaining to China, including the South China Sea, and then the Taiwan issue, as well as the Xinjiang issue. Thank you. I think we can start. I think all the three questions are for our speakers, so I can let Vu Kristen first to answer.
Okay. On the question related to which sector that we should be focusing on, I would like to sort of like point out like two priorities. One is related to the small medium enterprise, and also the maritime product, related to maritime product. When it comes to the small, because I think this is relevant to Indonesia's own situation where we are facing the risk of deindustrialization and also the weakening of middle class purchasing capacity, and this will have a long-term effect on our economy. And I think the SME sectors have the potential because it will sort of like cater to the middle class, while at the same time also improve local economies on different regions. But I think I'd like to share a stories that was shared from a friend from the Alibaba group earlier, when during the first times they were sort of like attempting to provide some sort of like capacity building program for SMEs in order to access Taobao. As you know, Taobao is like China's Tokopedia, amongst the most popular and biggest e-commerce platform that was already at the time ready to open a special section for Southeast Asia. So Alibaba Group at the time was sort of like introducing capacity building program. So I was told that the Alibaba contacted the Ministry of Industry and asked for a list of like several hundreds of SMEs to be trained, and they couldn't get that list. So what happened is like so it was either the ministry did not have the list, or I'm not sure what was the problem. They couldn't get the list. So Alibaba established their own list. They looked for themselves, looking for networks from different civil societies to help gather sort of like, can you recommend names? So they managed to, I think if I'm not mistaken, around 350 SMEs. So they provide the capacity building training, etc. But after the capacity building training, there's no follow-up from the government. There's no sort of like policies that sustain, that enable these SMEs to sort of like get into the Chinese market. So what happened is like the whole program sort of like just died down slowly, gradually just gone. So the previous list, already within that previous list, already several sort of like hundreds already gone because they're not sustainable by themselves, let alone accessing e-commerce platform in China. So there's going to be a synergy between our own sort of like government industrial policy with our own trade policy. I think since the separation of Ministry of Trade and Industry in Indonesia, there has been that kind of like gap that has been criticized. So this type of like the future sort of like governance should be looking into how to make a better sort of like coordination in that particular aspects. When it comes to maritime products, we also have already established the two countries, twin park program between Fujian local government and three industrial areas in Indonesia, Batang, Bintan, and Aviarna, I think, and one in Sumatra, two in Java. I've seen the maritime product processing in the one in Fujian, in Fuqing. It was high tech, it was digitalized, it was very much modernized and very effective. But I haven't seen the similar equivalent programs in the three different industrial parks, especially when it comes to maritime products. And the situation with their maritime product is not just about the processing facilities within that industrial complex, but also the sort of like the connectivity issues when it comes to accessing to ports, accessing to, you know, distribution of these marine products, you know, how we're going to, despite the fact that we are a maritime archipelagic country with thousands of islands and huge areas of seas, we lack the logistical capacity to sort of like improve the optimization of the sector. So if I would have to sort of like pinpoint, it should be sort of like these two areas of maritime sectors and also SMEs.
I think you can continue with the second and third question. Taiwan.
Taiwan? On Taiwan issue, I think for Indonesia, it has been quite consistent when it comes to One China policy. And it was, unlike the, say, for example, in the United States, where interpretation of One China policy changes throughout different administrations, I think in Indonesia, it's quite consistent. The 2 points of it is that Indonesia acknowledged Taiwan as part of China and also support a peaceful reunification process period. And the concerns over Taiwan, whether or not there's going to be war in the Taiwan Strait, is part of the concern of a lot of Indonesian officials, especially amongst the security agencies, more so because of the fact that not just about the China's quote-unquote aggression, but also the dynamics within the United States itself, how the U.S. is responding to Taiwan, etc. It becomes a concern as well. So that's about Taiwan. About the South China Sea and Xinjiang. South China Sea, I think I would only sort of like point out the urgency of having code of conduct being implemented soon. As far as I understood during Ibu Retno's period, the Chinese counterpart promised to accelerate and sort of like finish up the COC process, I think last year. But then again, suddenly the Minister of Foreign Affairs in China got arrested and he's gone. So there's no follow-up after that yet. So I would encourage the adoption of COC as soon as possible. And when it comes to Xinjiang, I think I would sort of like try to look at it from shared similarities between Indonesia and China when it comes to issues of religious affairs. This is just for point of discussion, yeah. It's not my personal position. I think like all kinds of freedom of religious activity should be supported and also should be protected. So in characteristic, first, Indonesia and China similarly have constitutional protections for religious activities. So both constitution allow religious expression, with the exception of China. I think it's more strict in terms of proselytizing. So you can get into trouble if you proselytize without sort of like the consent of the government. Both Indonesia and China sort of like put restrictions when it comes to religion. You have to register to the government. We have currently 6 religions in Indonesia. Same with China. You have like registered religious institutions like the Catholic Patriotic Associations. So religious activities is present in China. But I think that at the same time, another shared element of it is concerns over extremism and radicalism. This shared sort of like concern, if you see, we've heard news about how mosques in China are being shattered, are being sort of like torn down, or like, you know, the same thing happened to churches in Indonesia, and also other sort of like Islamic group like Ahmadiyya, who's being attacked, considered as, you know, illegal, quote unquote. So this is, but this is also something that is related to the fact that a lot of sort of like radical movement in both countries that are increasingly gaining the attention of the security apparatus. And this kind of like radicalism is something that want to be avoided on different ways. You've heard news about China restricting the use of hijab, or in reality, it's more sort of like a regulation instead of how you wear your hijab, etc. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that this is like a kind of difference. Whereas in Indonesia, you've heard sort of like also comments from friends on NU, for example, and suggesting that don't be don't get too far with the Arabization, quote unquote, of religious activities in Indonesia. Indonesian Muslim is more moderate. Indonesian Muslim has their own identity, etc. So this kind of narrative is sort of like a shared concern. Terrorism is another aspect of it. The actual the threat of terrorists from Uyghur is real in Indonesia. Several years ago, for example, the conflicts in Poso arrested several Uyghur descent terrorists who was quietly being settled between the two governments. So the threat that is happening so they have this kind of like shared concern, which sort of like led to probably some tacit understanding between the two governments when it comes to dealing with the issues in Xinjiang and Uyghur. But also at the same time, I think the issues of the Xinjiang and Uyghur in Indonesia suffers with the over-exaggeration. I personally, for example, when they said like genocide, when they said like genocide, I'm like, I'm not convinced that that's happening. Or like when they said like concentration camp, I think the physical presence of these buildings is true, and the Chinese call it re-education camp. And earlier I spoke to several officials from the anti-terrorist body of Indonesia who apparently have made visits to China to look into this. And they were actually saying that they would actually want something like that in Indonesia because of the de-radicalization program. In this re-education camp, you see like some of the people inside got trained with vocational training, engineers, machineries, like cooking, etc., etc., to technically so that they will be more equipped when they were released from that re-education center and released to the society, so they can sort of like do more sort of like work outside terrorizing people. And this kind of like de-radicalization program is lacking in Indonesia. So from the point of view of anti-terrorism and de-radicalization program, those are something that for the Indonesian counterpart look at something that, oh, maybe this should be something that we should adopt. So it's not just about Indonesia is scared of China, scared of the economic sanctions coming in from China, etc., etc. There are more layers on that issue, so I'm just gonna stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Bro Christian. Next, Pak Dino.
Thank you. In my first 10-day in Beijing, I was reminded by a colleague from the Chinese Foreign Ministry and say, Dino, if you want to have a healthy relations with the foreign ministry, please base your reasoning on your national interests, scientific and calculated, and not align yourself by following other countries or other countries' involvement just because we are following the lead. That has, I think, was connected to our diplomatic note in requesting the evacuation of Indonesian students from Wuhan. So our diplomatic note was unofficially rejected, and I was phoned and says, please don't use the word evacuation, because that has a meaning that China is not responsible to protect Indonesian students. And that coincides, I guess, with the diplomatic note made by the United States and by Japan, was also trying to evacuate their the nationals from Wuhan. So it's just a matter of retracting our diplomatic note and say we just want to assist in returning back Indonesians for the holiday season, which at that time there were no planes, there were no commercial airlines going there, and so we had to bring in a chartered plane. But we just said within that notice, we want to assist in the returns of Indonesians during the holiday seasons. And just by changing that, it's our permission to land, retract, and move around 215 Indonesians was easily done. We were the third country after the United States, Japan, and Indonesia on that Sunday morning or Saturday night at the end of January, if I'm not mistaken. So from that lesson, I say is that any reasons that we have, it has to be within our national interest. We're not following others because we are independent, of course, and active, and that it reflects a calculated and scientific reasoning of how we deal with China. And along the lines also is that we are Asians, we also understand that we have to save face. So these elements is, I guess, and how we try to deal. So let me start off with the relations between China and Taiwan. Legally, it's within our MOUs and so forth that we respect the one China policy politically. And I guess all the other countries, even the United States, has that one China policy. But it does not undermine our relations with Taiwan in the economic, social, cultural, and others outside of the political spectrums that we have with China. So in that case, we're very happy that our workforces are going to Taiwan to train them into a much more better living. Our economic relations is also good, and that we try to see whether that this dynamic within the context of the one China policy does not see us as choosing sides one over the other. I think one forum that we have is the Forum on Managing Potential Conflicts in South China Sea. It's been going on for about more than 20 years. I guess there's a Chinese delegation, there's also a Taiwan delegation as an economic entity, and they get to speak a lot. We stand in the middle, and then sometimes they go back and forth commenting on, I think that's one of the dynamics. So it's just a matter of standing back and let them do their own business and try to find the solutions their own way. Is that we don't interfere, but as long as it benefits our collaborations in a win-win connections, then we're more happy to do so. There's an interesting question for what areas, which sector that we have not reached a strong enough level. In 2003, during the two sessions, I remember the emphasis of President Xi Jinping is that he would want to export more high-quality development goods. And I think that's a signal for us within China, to relate with China, is that they're trying to better their quality. They don't want to send in low qualities, and they're trying to export anything that can alleviate Chinese stature in the global world as a high-quality goods. I think that's one way that we can explore and see which can we collaborate with, whether that we have the resources in Indonesia that China needs, and that they can then build it here. Historically speaking, I've always said this, is that China and Indonesia has always complemented each other. If you look back to the historical factors, the tropical produce or the minerals that we have in Indonesia is always sought after by China, but China comes back and gives us technology and know-hows. Batik is, I think, originally owned by the Miao minority group. Somewhere along the lines during the 11th or 12th century, you have traders from China introducing the technique of membatik using local materials, but the designs are uniquely Indonesians, and that we've developed further that technology into something that becomes a national character into batik. But the documentations of who first used the wax and techniques of doing so, it has been documented that the Miao minority group has already done so way before that we've been doing batiks. So these kinds of exchanges is, I guess, a win-win part. Have we ever gone to war? Have we ever gone to war with China during Nusantara? The only time that we were invaded is during the Mongol dynasty, and that was, I guess, because of our own doing. But but the point is that in managing these relations with China is that for thousands of years they are excellent traders. They never conquered any country. They don't want to own it. They just want to trade with it and have a good deal. And so for Indonesians who's located between India and China and where these two countries come and trade, we have the expertise to deal both sides and still we can maintain our culture. And as part of Indonesia, it's like, okay, China wants a deal, how can we get a deal for that? Jadi haggling or tawar-menawar, that's in our job to do so. So if you have an opportunity with China, China wants to collaborate with this, again, it's the duty of the local governments, the duty of the ministries to get the best deal that we can have. Tawar-menawarnya itu, that's, how do you do bargaining, yeah, the best bargaining. So then, one of the best bargains that China has with the collaborations of the high-speed railway is that we were the first country to collaborate high-speed railway. We knew that. We were the one to trust Chinese technology. We got that, it got done. And from that, other countries now started using Chinese technology. Vietnam, I guess. Thailand, I think it's in the books of completing the Eastern Corridor. Maybe later on Malaysia. But again, if you're the first buyer in the market, then you can expect, like, how can I get a discount? Because I will elevate your sales later on because I'm the first buyer. And so that kind of thinking is that this is how we do business. And how can we go back to which sector that we haven't reached strong enough level? It comes back to us. I guess the opportunity given by China is way more than what we know, than what we need. And I remember in 2019, before I arrived, that we lost a lot of manufacturing opportunities to Vietnam. Yeah. Now, Vietnam is China's #1 trading partner, but they're heavily deficited. So from our notes, we see many manufacturing companies that are based in Vietnam. They rely more on imported goods from Vietnam. And then they re-export that to other countries because they already have comprehensive economic partnerships with other regions. But China still exports a lot more rather than the imports from Vietnam. Had we done so and have these manufacturings by importing the raw materials from China, you would see how the imbalance later on would create, and then you have a lot more critics saying that we are now in China's dominance in terms of trade. So again, it all comes back to us, ministries, local governments, and try how to get the best deal possible to our own interests, the priorities. We don't sacrifice, forsaken, let's say, we never thought that to just sacrifice our environment not to develop, but sometimes we use research from Celios and say, hey, look, they say that the environment is getting worse in Morowali, what can you do about this? So again, those kind of things that we can do to get a better deal and say that, hey, you want to improve your reputations, let's deal with having a better environment in Morowali. Those kind of things, I guess, adds up into moving forward together as developing countries. Xinjiang. In 2021, I was invited by the government of China together with Shanghai Cooperation Organization members at that time to visit Xinjiang in between the COVID pandemic for a 10-day visit. It was paid by the Chinese government. It was hosted by the Communist Party, and that we were given a theme that China now has fulfilled in eradicating extreme poverty. And for that test case is that it's in Xinjiang. So while we were there was three, I guess, themes of the programs that were done by the central government in Xinjiang. One is to fight terrorism, which the liberations group that is causing terrorist act has been accepted as a terrorist movement globally. Number two is to create competitiveness between the Uyghur people and the Han people that are coming in to develop the province. So it fits into the scenario of teaching people how to be more competitive, how to work better, and to create the infrastructures. And third is expediting the elimination of extreme poverty, because the program was that China should eradicate extreme poverty by 2020. And so when we visit 2021, it was supposed that, look, extreme poverty is gone, and now we're trying to better the lives of the people and the local people there. Of course, as diplomats, it is a paid program, and that you're supposed to see all the positives. But along the lines, you can see the things that they cannot hide. For instance, if I was traveling from the airport to the hotel, and along the highways, you can see so many skyscrapers, buildings, roads, bridges being built. You see the level of investments that the central government is giving them. And so it's not about, I guess, oppressing the people, but it's about they're trying to make the province of Xinjiang more developed economically so that the elevations of the welfare of the people goes up. And also we were given information regarding regulations. They do have an Islamic center, Islamic studies, mosques. There's a certain mosques that are considered as national heritage because it was part of the Silk Road travels, and along the lines up until Xi'an, that you have mosques. Even in Beijing, you have a national heritage mosques in, I think, 991. Yeah, the oldest, one of the oldest mosques in Beijing. So again, it's not illegal. It's how you practice it, and that for them it's part of the minority groups that they respect, and it's part of the broad spectrums of the Chinese people. I've also took note of the visit of the UN Commission on Chinese Affairs that visited in 2022 or 2023, if I'm not mistaken. It was done, I guess, a week before she retired as a special envoy, and that report, I think, was protested by China because it did not reflect the exit speech that she made, and when she exited, it was totally different than the report that was written. Again, upon reading it, it's just a matter of perception to perspective. In some perceptions, it may be something that China is doing wrong, but within the whole perspective, the bigger picture is they're trying to alleviate the welfare of the people. Another experience about poverty alleviation is that we were brought into a housing complex on the side of on the urban city side, and saying that, look, we've built houses, apartment buildings, and on the bottom floor we have a manufacturing for textile people to work with. And one of the ways of alleviating poverty is that you provide education, you provide health, and then you give them an annual salary. So if I'm a census officer from a local government, I can check those boxes. Okay, then that's not absolute poverty. But the problem is they moved a whole community on a mountainside because they work on the land, they don't have any income, they don't have any education, and they don't have any health welfare. So they moved the whole kampung from the mountainside into that apartment building and give them their jobs. As statisticians, I can tick all the boxes and say, I've done my job, there's no poverty here, but is it within the interest of these people to be moved back? Because the land is owned by the Chinese government, people cannot own the land, and that a lot of young people have moved to the cities, and these are mostly old people or overaged, which they rely on social services, which social service can't go there. So again, it's a matter of, can you actually put this into a box of any violations that we have? It comes into which perspectives or which perceptions that you're going into. And we see that as part of the difficulties in how to manage 1.4 billion people and moving forward into becoming, eradicating total poverty. Um, the last question is independence. What is
South China.
Oh, South China Sea. Um, First of all, our relations currently right now, or even the joint statements between President Prabowo and President Xi Jinping, does not violate the territorial independence of Indonesia at all. So that's part of the defending Indonesia's integrity, and that our recognition of Natuna and North Natuna Islands within the Negara Kesatuan Indonesia is not in violations of that. Number two is that we are also in agreement with ASEAN countries and also with other countries that the issues of South China Sea should be done collectively among ASEAN countries, and that these ways of doing so is within the international norms of the UN Conventions on Law of the Seas, and also with other ASEAN agreements. So the joint statement was more focused on how can we improve the economic cooperations that we have within the maritime sector that were already in progress. Let's say the maritime collaborations in Maluku for fisheries, and then for building ports, Kuala Namu, also managing illegal fisheries, and that you have then cases where you have violations of, as you mentioned, the economic zones of Indonesia, which overlaps to the claimants of China. In my 3 years, I've always been called by the Directorate for Boundaries and Maritime Affairs. The key answer is that, one, we agree to disagree on certain principles, but it should not hamper the collaborations in other parts. Number two is that if there is an issue, it should be managed well. It should not, say, go on a megaphone diplomacy of the media trying to hype and then going into public opinion. They say that, we enjoyed a very close relations. I'm just a phone call away. If there's a crisis, please give us a phone call. And then that's why it comes into a full circle during my first 10 days, and that I do not want to make my colleagues lose face. And so if we want to manage it that let's discuss this openly. Let's talk about what is there, and then we try not to escalate the situations. I've been, I think, well, not as much as my Philippine counterparts, but I had my fair share of scoldings, and that it's just a matter that I don't respond negatively to that. I just say that, look, I understand that we have different views, and that we should be based on that, and that if I don't respond back to those scoldings, I can save another 30 minutes of his coming back. But we ended up understanding that, look, as long as we keep a close and open communications and trust, for instance, if there's a fishing boats, or there's an incident of Indonesian Navy meeting one of their fishermen, we should say that, look, hold back, do not escalate the situations, and just both sides move back and trying to manage it. And then I learned also of a certain culture, and this is my last story, is that in my first year, I was invited to an Imlek celebration dinner. And that's on the Imlek Eve, that you're invited for dinner by a family. And one of the main menu is that you have to have fresh fish, representing prosperity, good luck on the next year. So imagine during COVID, in January, you have to provide fresh fish, a large one, to more than 1.4 billion Chinese in a short period of time. And where can you get the fish, those fresh fish? Of course, the closest one is South China Sea. And so all we have to do is now is anytime between December and January, we collaborate with the Chinese in providing them fresh fish, and so we can avoid the illegal fishing. You don't have fishermen looking into the South China Seas. They can have it elsewhere, and that we can provide them even on a business model of providing it in time so that they can fulfill their needs of buying fresh fish in January. And not to mention that in January, it's for us in Indonesia, it's a new budget year. Sometimes that the patrols are hampered by budgets and buying gasolines during the January year, and that's why I have to borrow money. So for us now, we have to make sure that in January we have enough resources to guard and be there in South China Sea. I don't see in the past any reports, negative reports in 2023 or 2024 in South China Seas with Indonesia right now. But now the talks now is not just about the fish, but it's on the seabeds now, about explorations and then so forth. And again, within the joint communique, on the paragraph, there's a wording that says that as long as it doesn't violate Indonesia's obligations or violates Indonesia's legalities and laws, that we can do collaborations. So again, if it violates Indonesian laws and Indonesia's commitment to international agreements, then for sure that we're not going to implement that. No, ada kata-katanya on disputed. The words is on disputed areas.
Any update on the progress of COC negotiation?
The COC, sometimes, again, it's not, again, if you point at China on the CSC, sometimes there's 3 or 4 fingers also pointing back towards ASEAN. And again, I guess it's an ASEAN matter also to be fully committed on the COC, and then that we could go forward with China.
Okay, thank you. Last but not least.
Yeah, thanks so much. So related to the Taiwan Strait, we need to take care that many of the Indonesians workers there need to go somewhere else if there is a escalating conflict, right? And where else? The problem is not the Middle East, too far away. And we have previously problems with the Saudi Arabia, and then there is a moratoriums of the migrant workers to send there. But China is right now is moving fast to the aging populations. So they need a lot of the care workers. Japan, of course, South Korea, of course, but China itself is still lack of the Indonesian migrant worker in mainland China. And then the second thing is about the semiconductors and also chips industries related. Intel's already invest 1.5 billion US dollars in Vietnam. The next one, 7 billion US dollars in Malaysia. So Microsoft already talked with the Malaysian government. Where's Indonesians? So I think the lesson learned, either there is a trade war or escalating in the Taiwan Strait. I think Indonesia need to focus more how to bring those factories in Taiwan, offshorings to Indonesia. Not whole relocations of the factories, but at least 20% of the factory capacity, manufacturing capacities in Indonesia. So we need to emphasize that Indonesia already built a lot of the industrial park in Brebes, Kendal, Batang, right? So why those kind of the places need to be more good technologies, infrastructures, waste management, and also powered by renewable energies. So I think the potential there's, okay, we need to be cautious about the conflict in the South China Sea and Taiwan Straits, but we also have a potential to bring the job here in Indonesia. And then the other things I just want to answer is about which sector we are not yet improved about the China-Indonesia relations. It's all about the energy transitions. So we still have a lot of the captive coal power plant in the pipeline, and the Chinese government need to notice that we need to stop building more coal power plant overseas, especially in Indonesia. So that's a direct message. But on the other hand, we need to say yes, that if the Chinese government's Belt Road Initiative projects and also Chinese company want to help Indonesia through energy transitions as a Prabowo commitments, then we need 27.5 billion US dollars of the coal retirement by 2050. So that's excluding the off-grid, the captive coal retirements, because many of them is still like 5 years, 10 years. But at least the Chinese government need to have a moratorium on the new captive coal power plant and build more corporations to early retires the PLN power plants and IPP power plants. The second thing is about the transmission and grid. Everyone talk about the renewable energies, but the big flaw here is about the transmission and grid investments. Is Chinese governments want to bring their technologies, cooperate with Indonesia SOEs. You can do directly through Indonesia company, business to business, but also use Danantara, because Danantara should be our leverage. If the project is too risky, building transmission and grid too risky, then use Danantara. Danantara can cooperate with the Chinese state-owned enterprise, with the Chinese funding and so on. So I think there's a huge potential need to be done. And then it's also related to the restorative forest economy. So once again, the forest economy is very, very important cooperations between China, Indonesia, and also Middle East if you want to do the trilateral cooperations. And pharmaceutical. So why pharmaceutical is excluded from the US reciprocal tariff? If we look that, because the US also worried that if they have a huge or higher tariff on the pharmaceutical product, maybe the budget of the US government to the healthcare and then inflationary pressures to the peoples in the US will be goes up because of the health cost increase. So pharmaceuticals is excluded from the tariff that being played by the Trump. So we can export more to China or export directly to US, whatever it is. But the next one, the pharmaceutical industry should be one of the top Indonesian government priorities. And Indonesia has one of the largest biodiversity in the world. Not only of the forest cover, but biodiversity. It means that we have a lot of organic pharmaceuticals, raw materials available here in Indonesia and not yet to be processed. And also depends on the technical ministries. If they want to use more Western technologies, I think the cooperations between Indonesia and China to exchange more of the technology to develop value added in the pharmaceuticals, raw materials, I think will be low. But on the other hand, if the technical ministry thinks that we need to cooperate more with the China, with the Chinese companies, Chinese governments for pharmaceutical industry, I think we can do better on that. Also, it depends on the Indonesian side also. See the pharmaceutical industry cooperations as important or not. The other one is the food security. So let's assume that the Chinese government under Xi Jinping have a proper green revolutions, turning deserts in Mongolia and so on, and help other countries in like Pakistan, even inside the mainland China itself, to grow more crops and send export or domestic market orientation. So the food security here is the problem in Indonesia. I would say that why we need to open up more forests for the food estate, for what? So bring more technology from China, cooperate with the smart farming from China. So you don't need excess land to give more productive output of the crops or plantations. So I think that this is kind of the missing link. And then last time Prabowo visit China, met Xi Jinping and get a tour in the school talking about the free meals programs. But the problem is we're still missing what? Monitorings of the free meal program in Indonesia using technologies. You know that we monitor free meal program using WhatsApp. Take a pictures and then the live stream of the kitchen when they cook. Hey, come on, China have better technologies on that. Use IoT, use many of the advanced technology to monitor. So there will be like a 0% of the students or pupils getting intoxications, right? Nausea and so on because of the food poisoning. And last but not least, I think if the Chinese government is very, very serious about maintaining trade relations with the Indonesia's, one of the big negotiations that Indonesia need to push is to have fair non-tariff measures. So a long time ago, there is a banana plantations in Indonesia. The farmers want to send banana to China, and they have a problem because a lot of the certifications, health certifications, safeguard, and so on. So and during the COVID-19, our fish export to China, because Padino talked a lot about the fish, and memories of the COVID-19 when we evacuate our citizen from China. But I want to add one more funny stories that when we export our fish to China during the COVID-19, in the port, the Chinese authority said that one of the samples of a fish package from Indonesia tainted by the COVID-19 virus samples, right? So it's a package, if I'm not mistaken at the time. Not the fish, but the package tainted by, the container, infected by the COVID-19. So it is part of the non-tariff measures. And China right now, according to WTO, they have 3,200 more non-tariff barriers or measures. Indonesia, 350. So if we talk about deals, about the future opportunity, we're not talking about balancing trade like Trump using the tariff. No need for that one. Just to make sure that any goods from Indonesia that I mentioned a lot about the many value added products, including the nickels product, we should have the same standard, mutual benefit standards. So exporter from Indonesia can get much benefit when exported to China. I think that's to close my remarks. Thank you, Mas Speaker.
Thank you. I think our time is up. I want to thank all the speakers who have made all the way here and presented their thought very well. And I want to thank all the participants who have also made their way to our office here. And just for a reminder that we have that our studies related to China or beyond are available on our website, and our upcoming events are also available on our website and on our Instagram. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, and we can take a photo now. We have our latest book on China-Indonesia relations. Bertiga ya. No place. No need. Feel free to take the lunch as well as the water can be taken from the dispensers. Thank you.